What's your I met a celebrity but didn't let on that I knew who they were story? My dad and I bumped into Michael Jordan at a Walgreens near Chicago. This was back in 2006 or so. We were picking out birthday cards for my mom, and MJ and his son came in the same aisle browsing some cards. My dad kept his cool and continued to look through different cards, giving him his personal space. I, on the other hand, was 9 years old and in awe, sort of staring at him. After MJ picked out his card, he winked at me and gave me a walk by fist bump. Didn't really set in until I was older how cool that was. I used to be a server at a Mexican restaurant right outside LA in the late 90s. One day Leonardo DiCaprio came in with who I assume was his mom to have lunch. This would have been post-Titanic, so really at the peak of his breakthrough mega celeb status. He was wearing a ball cap, sunglasses and unshaven, but I recognized him anyway. I didn't let anyone know and I wrote something like "Your movies are awesome. I hope you liked our food" on his receipt when I dropped it off at the table. After he left, I swung by and picked up his payment and he had left me a note back that said "Thank you so much for not blowing my cover" with a $100 tip. Sheet was awesome. I was only like 19. I went and got some PlayStation games with it after my shift ended. Samuel L. Jackson was on my flight. I was second to last to board the flight and there was all this commotion with the flight attendants and gate crew. Once I approached the door of the plane I realized they were all looking at Samuel L. Jackson. He was standing by the cockpit making himself available to passengers' fans. I played it cool. Didn't say a word. Turns out, I'm shy around celebrities. I'm just glad I didn't make a snakes on the plane joke. Was at a convenience store in LA when me and a very nicely dressed black gentleman walked up to the cashier at the same time to pay. It was nighttime and he had his dark shades on and was talking on his phone. I gave him the "after you" gesture and he nodded and said "Thanks buddy," paid and left. It wasn't until he was out of the store that I realized he was Jamie Foxx. In the mid-90s I was a cab driver. Our service was like a cross between a limo and a taxi, and we serviced some fancy resorts. As I dropped off my passenger at a resort, another guy asks if I'm a taxi, and I say yes, so he tells his friend their cab is here. His friend got in the car and said "This ain't no cab, smells too good to be a cab" in that unmistakable Chris Rock voice. He and his friend just bullshitted with each other for the 15-minute drive to local nightclub. There was a white kid trying to talk to the yellow cab driver ahead of us in the parking lot and Chris Rock started imitating the kid, like "I need a ride, yeah, I'm drunk, but I need a ride," and I was trying really hard not to laugh out loud. He wasn't nearly as famous yet at the time, but I had seen his stand-up routines on Comedy Central and knew exactly who he was, but didn't go fanboy on him. 10/10 would drive Chris Rock again. Conan O'Brien. My college friend's dad owned an Irish restaurant in Manhattan and she waitressed there back in the 1990s. She said he was super rude to the staff and was a bad tipper. One day a bunch of us were walking in the city and we saw him at a sidewalk cafe. We stopped and stared and he noticed we were talking about him. My other friend went up to his table and asked him to take a picture of us and handed him her camera. His friends at the table had a huge laugh at his expense as we posed for a picture without him in it. We never let on we knew who he was. Now we all hold dear enough sent a photo of us with a funny backstory. I helped Steven Spielberg move his daughter's bags into her college dorm. I was working a shift helping first years move in and I see a guy in a hat and sunglasses who is unmistakably Spielberg. I strike up a conversation, ask if he needs help with the bags, etc. First names only, we're from CA. My wife, Kate, and I sent all our kids to East Coast schools though, stuff like that. Later, when his daughter opened the door for the first time, he whipped out a camcorder and, wearing the biggest dad grin, recorded the whole thing before turning the camera on my friend and me to ask us about the city. So, I have a supporting, the luggage, speaking role in a limited release, home movie, film shot by Steven Spielberg. My mom is a big sports fan. One time she was shopping at and saw a really large, fit looking man who she didn't immediately recognize but seemed familiar. She thought it must have been a professional football player or something, so she went up to the only other person in the shop, who was this smaller weird looking guy, and asked him if he knew who the athletic looking man was. The short guy looked at my mom and said, "That's my bodyguard, I'm Elton John." This happened yesterday. My wife took my son to the zoo, and he wanted to read every little plaque in the reptile area. My wife was distracted for a moment, so he asked the nearest stranger to read the plaque for him. My wife turned around to see Scarlett Johansson happily reading the info to him. Robin Williams used to walk around my lone childhood country town near SF. I saw him once, after hearing many rumors about his sightings, not entirely unlike Bigfoot or Nessie sightings. My brain didn't fully comprehend what it was seeing, but I could tell he was trying his very best to remain incognito and not draw any unwanted attention. We locked eyes. He smiled, I smiled and nodded back, and we both went our separate ways. I, almost literally, ran into Shaq at a small restaurant in LA. He was standing in the doorway. You know how some people are so tall you don't see them? So I'm exiting the doorway, and say, "Excuse me man," and he stepped aside so I could leave. He is one large human being. Met Elon Musk in a Tesla store in LA. Really wanted to meet him but didn't want to be that guy. Decided I had a plan, so walked up to him and said, "Excuse me, do you work here?" He replied, "I mean yeah, kind of." I say, "What can you tell me about the entertainment console of the Model S?" He says, "Let me see if I can find someone to help you." To which I say, "Now I'm just ducking with you." He laughed and shook my hand and walked off. I was sitting at the Genius bar at an Apple store one day and a very large man with dreads came and sat next to me. He was bringing his phone in to get fixed because he dropped it and didn't have a case. I overheard an employee jokingly say, "You wear a helmet when you play football. Shouldn't your phone have the same protection?" I knew it was Larry Fitzgerald, but I didn't want to be a fanboy, so I started asking very broad questions about what he did as a profession to stay engaged in a conversation with him. Larry Fitz is, to this day, one of the nicest, most humble people I have ever met. My dad met Robin Williams in an elevator. He got in and they rode a few floors in silence. They stopped on a floor and a bunch of fans ran in and started getting pics with Robin. My dad said he was gracious and took pics with everyone. The doors closed and they rode a few more floors and my dad turned and said, "Does that ever get old?" And Robin smiled and said, "Nope. Never." Then my dad got off on his floor and they nodded to one another and my dad went on with his day. I was 10 years old in 2002 when my mom took me to the Bronx Zoo for the first time. It was a rainy day so we practically had the whole place to ourselves except for 3 British kids running around, chaperoned by a woman. My mom quickly befriended the woman while I made like a kid and joined the horde, looking at spiders and scorpions and sharing in the awe and excitement of the animals. After about an hour when we said our goodbyes, my mother told me that the kid, Daniel, who I had been hanging out with, had played Harry Potter in the movie that came out last year. I had thought he looked familiar. Jared Leto. I work in an outdoor goods store in Boulder, CO, which for those who don't know is one of the biggest climbing towns in the US. He came into the store to get some stuff as he's known to travel here and climb with other big pros, notably Alex Honnold, who is a buddy of his. He had been outed in the middle of the footwear department by a co-worker on mine in front of a big group of customers, so by the time he got over to the climbing area where I work he was really on edge and unfriendly. I walked up to him and honestly just acted like he wasn't hot sheet. I acted like I didn't really know who he was and just spoke to him like any other customer, even breaking conversation with him at several points to answer questions for other folks as opposed to giving him my full undivided attention. After about 5 minutes of that he totally relaxed and his entire demeanor changed. He went from being somewhat rude and cold to being very chill, calling me bro etc. And I ended up walking around the store with him for like 25-30 minutes helping him shop. The only time I implied I knew who he was towards the end as I was ringing him up. He asked me to recommend some climbing spots close to town like the Flatirons. It was a beautiful Saturday and I said to him that those places are great but he'll get bombarded by people if he goes there, and I recommended some spots just outside of town instead. He sorta leaned in and thanked me for my discretion, and that was it. It seemed like he really just wanted to be treated like a normal guy. I met a celebrity but I didn't realize who he was. I posted before in a thread buried in 10k comments. Doubt anyone saw it. Years ago, like 20 years ago, I went to see Adam Sandler stand up at a small comedy club. Clearly I knew who he was because I got tickets to his show. My date and I were running a smidge late and ran into a guy in the lobby. A guy I used to work with, so I was like, "Hey, Danny, how are you doing? What have you been up to?" He was like, "I'm good. How are you?" I responded that I was good, but running late for the show. Had to run, and he said, "Okay, have a good night," and walked off. As my date and I walked into the club, he said, "You know who that was?" It wasn't Danny. It was Adam Sandler. But, gotta say, he played the part of Danny well. One of his better roles. Working cashier at a tiny candy store during a lull, and suddenly we're swarmed with black suits and shades. Some guys in suits come in with more shades shadowing them. They browse, buy chocolates, and hand them to another suit. I joked to one guy about that box definitely not being big enough for everyone, and he laughs and buys 3 more. They pack up and shades escort them out. Couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. When I went home, I found out that Air Force 2 had landed for a conference nearby, and I had managed to convince the secretary of something, defense, I believe, to buy $200 of chocolate. I worked at a movie theater in Albuquerque at the time they were filming the first Avengers film. Captain America was about to come out, I remember, because we had the huge standee of him in the lobby. I was reading in the box office when 3 people came up. Guy asked for 3 tickets to Bridesmaids. It was dark out and he had a green baseball cap and sunglasses. He paid with a credit card. Christopher Evans. I stared at the card after I swiped it. Handed it back. "I need you to sign the receipt." He did. And then he walked in. Edit. Thanks for all the comments, guys. Just to add on, I didn't recognize the other 2 with him. One was a blonde woman and the other was a guy with buzzed hair and a 6 o'clock shadow. Also, I only lived in ABQ for a year in 2010 to 2011. I was at a test screening of the movie Valkyrie. Me and my friends were near the front of the theater talking before the movie started, and I went on this big, loud rant about how normally I like Tom Cruise movies but War of the Worlds was such a piece of shit. One of the worst movies I've ever seen. Plot didn't make sense. They strung a bunch of cool scenes together and put a shit happy ending on it and called it a day. After I wrap up my 5-minute rant outlining everything wrong with War of the Worlds, the person sitting behind us tapped me on the shoulder and pointed 4 seats down in my row to Tom Cruise glaring at me. I gave him the nod and sat there for what might have been the longest 10 minutes before a movie started ever. Not quite what you were asking for, but close enough for an excuse to tell that story. TLDR, didn't notice Tom Cruise was listening while I talked shit about one of his movies. Used to work at a posh hotel and we had wedding there all the time. I was pretty young at the time, say 15. David Tennant was at one wedding, Dr. Ducking and I was pouring him coffee. At first I was sat there thinking is he isn't he, so I was playing it cool. I went back to the kitchen to top up more coffee in my coffee jug and the staff were talking about it too before deciding it actually was David Tennant. Spent the rest of the night playing it cool because I was in that whatever stage of teenage life. Inside I was freaking out. My friend's mom, over 70 years old, owns a small Asian grocery store. Post Malone came walking in with his girlfriend and his mom had no idea who he was. A few cute things happened. She was nervous because of his tattoos, but happy not worried once he bought a lot of food. She had no idea he was a celebrity. She gave him a free snack for buying so much food and told him to come back for lunchtime for cheap and tasty gyoza. He did come back the next day. She was worried he would get mugged going to his car because of 3 big men outside, so she followed him outside. They were his bodyguards. She really liked his cool car. It was a Lamborghini. She told my friend about the encounter that evening and he pulled up a YouTube video based on the description. It was him. When Post Malone came back the next day for Gyoza, she got a selfie with him. It's on my friend's phone, so I don't have a picture available right now. Whole thing is adorable with how innocent his mommy's. 3 years back I was working at a Whataburger in Austin and internet personality Maya Khalifa walks in with 5 other people. She and her friends ordered the largest meal they can and ate it in the lobby. The whole time the back kitchen is getting overly excited. Looking back, it was pretty weird to see her in person and is the only celebrity I have seen in person. My sister had an encounter with Jack Black where she didn't know it was him. We were at a concert for my uncle's band and she texted me from downstairs while she was charging her phone. I totally just had a conversation with someone who looked like a fatter Jack Black. I texted her back that our uncle knows Jack Black and that was definitely him. Good thing she didn't do the whole "do you ever get that you look like a heavier Jack Black" thing. I drove a Lamborghini down to a bar in the Algarve and parked up outside. I've just left 5-a-side football and I'm wearing a Glasgow Rangers shirt. As I'm walking onto the terrace, I realize there is an actual Rangers player sitting there with presumably his wife and a kid in a buggy. In Scotland this guy won't be able to go anywhere without being recognized and hassled. It was kinda funny seeing him just sitting there completely anonymous. He obviously seen my shirt, seen me looking at him. I knew who he was, and he knew that I knew. I just smiled and didn't say a thing. He nodded his head and went back to chatting to his wife. A bunch of kids were now crowding my car and I just let them pose in it for pics and so on. So here I am getting all this attention. Just a nobody with a bit of money, sitting 10 feet from an actual famous person back home who's being totally ignored. He left before me. Maybe half an hour later I asked for my bill and the waitress said, "Oh, the big fella paid it." She had no idea who he was either. I guess he appreciated the anonymity enough to pay for my tushandas and a cheese and ham toast. Late to the party, but hope this is not buried. I kept mine up a long time. I was in the waiting room at physical therapy. Another patient walked in, and without looking up from my reading material, I could tell by how the staff greeted him that he was famous. I looked up and saw a huge man, with the build of a retired football player, walk towards the workout area. At the end of my appointment, I was in the back room, getting electrical stimulation on a table. The guy was on the table across from me. I gave him a friendly hello, and we chatted as he got his Eastim. The guy who owns the place is a terrible gossip. I don't go there anymore, so I just said on my next appointment, "Hey, there was a guy here at the same time as me last week. I could tell he was famous, but I don't know who he is. He looks like a pro football player." He goes, "Oh, you must mean AC. Yeah, you remember what he's famous for, right? He was OJ's buddy, and was driving the white Bronco in the getaway. I was just a kid at that time, and didn't give a damn about OJ and his trial, other than media helicopters circling my school occasionally and messing up my studies. I never watched any of the news about it. I only watched cartoons at the time. Of course I'd seen the footage of the car chase since, but honestly didn't really know or care about it. The next time he and I had appointments at the same time, he walked in with a huge smile, greeting me. I realized that he thought he'd finally met someone who didn't know his infamous past, and just treated him like a regular dude. I didn't want him to lose that, so I kept up the facade. I had appointments with him for months. We always greeted each other warmly, and talked about little stuff, like recent sports events, or the weather. He seemed to really take a liking to me. I decided I'd have to keep it up forever, so that he could have 20 minutes a week talking to someone like a regular dude. I saw him every other week for about 8 months. I served Daniel Radcliffe brunch one time. All the other servers were freaking the hell out that he was in our restaurant, so, given I don't care much about actors and would remain professional, I was chosen to take care of him. He ordered the eggs Benedict, no sides, extra Benedict. I dubbed it the Quad Benny. He was incredibly polite and appreciative, tipped well, and his accent was downright intoxicating. After that experience, I became a big Radcliffe fan. I met Hailey Baldwin now Hailey Bieber, at a summer program in Miami when I was 16. We were actually good friends that summer and would text somewhat regularly afterwards. At the time, people had mentioned that she was kinda famous, but I didn't realize how famous she was until way after the fact. I doubt she even remembers my name now. Ashley Teasdale. I was her waiter, a 36-year-old guy who was the furthest thing from her target market. I didn't let on that I knew her cause I didn't know who she was. Took care of her and her date the whole time. A couple of times when I was explaining the menu and asking if she'd been there before, she had a smirk on her face. Looking back, I guess she was probably thinking, I guess this guy doesn't know who I am. Later that night I was watching TV and there she was. I was like, WTF. I just waited on that girl tonight. GF was like, yeah, that's Ashley Teasdale. I used to take guided trips on horseback into the mountains in California. Came into work one day to take a group of 4 out for a ride at sunset. Party of 4 arrives, and it's none other than the Selena Gomez with 2 of her friends and one of the biggest, toughest bodyguards I've ever seen. I go around the table, shake everyone's hand, introduce myself, and never indicated I knew who she was. I'm a millennial, I definitely knew who she was. They had a wonderful time and I think they appreciated that I didn't ask for photos, autographs, or even acknowledge that I knew who they were. I imagine they don't get that very often. It just seemed like the polite thing to do. There was a big deal about Selena and her friends posting about riding horses on Instagram a few months back. I got down off my horse to take that photo for them, and those are our horses they are riding. It ended up in People magazine. Our horses took great care of the group, and got a lot of extra carrots that evening. Good boys. Not really a good response to your question, but I think this one is still pretty relevant. My dad is an filmmaker and received a call from Nicolas Cage's agent manager one day looking for a specific type of knife. My dad, not being very up to date on anything really, thought it might be some small time actor from a local sitcom or something. We live in South Africa and this was around 2007 or so. My dad got irritated when the agent couldn't really explain what kind of knife the legend himself wanted, and basically told him he needs to speak to this guy himself, or else they're really just wasting dad's time. So my dad and Nicolas Cage had a nice long chat over the phone, and all the while dad had no idea who he was. He says Nick was really nice, and is still to this day not fazed one bit about the whole ordeal. In fact, he keeps on forgetting who it was, and every time he tells the story to someone he phones me to check who that famous guy he spoke to on the phone that one time was. I don't think this fits, but a few years ago I was waiting at Miami airport for a flight to Atlanta and was sitting next to this pretty well-dressed guy. I'm a watch enthusiast, so I immediately noticed he was wearing a Richard Mille Fliber chronograph, roughly $150 K. My girlfriend heads to the bathroom, so it's just the 2 of us sitting there, and I just say, "Hey, nice watch." He just says thanks and goes back to playing on his phone. I assume he just thought I thought it looked cool and didn't know what it was. So I say, "Richard Mille Fliber chrono, right? Don't get to see those in person too often." This gets his attention and perks up. We end up talking for like an hour. My GF takes a long time in the bathroom, and he actually pulls out his travel watch bag with a nice Rolex and an Audemars Piguet white ceramic concept Royal Oak that hasn't been released, worth upwards of $300 K at the time. He was friends with the president of AP, who he had dinner with a few nights before. He let me try them all on. Really nice guy. Anyway, he mentioned his name and that he was a race car driver. But for the life of me, the second he got up I could not remember it. Spent the rest of the day googling names but couldn't find him.